The Honourable Bruce Dyson.
It hasn't been that long, Mr. Chairman. It was only in November that you... I know. Mr. Chairman, can I begin by congratulating you on your re-election as an officer of this Parliament, and say it's good to have you in the chair, and I'm sure that over the coming term you will continue to be fair and reasonable and allow robust debate whether the Minister has moved that it be wide-ranging or not, as you are regarded highly for your tolerance in ensuring that the debates go smoothly, but that everyone gets a fair opportunity to contribute. Can I also acknowledge the Minister, David Carter, and say that at the end of last year we had the opportunity to contest against each other in the Port Hills electorate this time for the 6th time, and we think we're now due to be put in the Guinness Book of Records for being the 2 New Zealand MPs who have stood against each other the most number of times and both got elected, one as the electorate MP and one as the list MP. I'm sure that is a record, but I'd quite like to hear from anyone who can be bothered researching it, who has more interest in that bit of research than me, because I frankly haven't put it as a priority. So if somebody else would like to do it, please contact me in my office, because I'd be really keen to know. But I also want to acknowledge David Carter and say how pleased I was that he had in his turn to take a call, acknowledge the work of previous Labour ministers. It's not always the case that members of one party acknowledge the work of other parties. I think it is important that we do that. We should try and keep the record straight. And on an issue like this, which is to the benefit of the health and well-being of New Zealanders literally as well as to our economy, I think it is important that we acknowledge that representatives of many parties have those interests at the heart of their thinking. It's also good to be supporting this legislation. I note that there's a huge amount of work that the Select Committee have done to it, including, I think, replacing the entire Schedule 1A of the bill, which looks to me to be brand new in session by the Select Committee. So the third acknowledgement I want to make is that of the work of the Select Committee. Shane Ardern, I know, is well regarded in the House for his chairing of Select Committees, but I also want to acknowledge all the members, particularly those who are no longer in this House, either by their own choice or the choice of our democratic process through the voting system. Jim Anderton, the Honourable Jim Anderton, was a member of the Select Committee. My friend and colleague from Christchurch Central, Brendan Burns, Dr Ashraf Chowdhury, and the National Member of Parliament, Sandra Gowdy. Those 4 were all members of the Select Committee that produced this amazing bit of work back to the House and are no longer with us to share in the debate. I'm sure that every one of them will be sitting beside their wireless this evening, hanging on to every word that is being said and ensuring that we have captured the essence of the good work that they've done, and I'm sure that they were well supported by the officials who are very keen for this debate to progress, I know. But Mr. Chairman, we've heard a lot of discussion about the reasons that this bill is so important for the well-being of our international reputation, for the well-being of our livestock, and ensuring that if there is a potential or real outbreak of any disease, that we do have that robust traceability. But I think the point that my colleague Grant Robertson made in his contribution is one of the more important points that we should also focus on, and that is because there is a changing nature of consumer interest, and there is a changing power that many consumers feel. For those who eat meat, and I'm not one of those people who does, but I'm well balanced by my colleague from Palmerston North, Ian Lees-Galloway, who eats more meat than one individual needs to eat in their entire lifetime, so he certainly balances up the fact that I don't share in that eating. But for people who do eat meat, they are more and more interested in knowing where the meat came from, the condition of the herd that it was raised in, and as we in New Zealand know, with more importance than perhaps any other country, we're more and more interested in the environmental degradation that may have been caused by the farming that animal that we're then eating came from eventually. So the opportunity for better promotion of the high quality, Mr. Chairman.
Honourable Ruth Dyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The opportunity for better marketing of our product, I think, is one of the byproducts of this legislation. Mr. Chairman, Grant Robertson also mentioned the sale of Surtrac. Surtrac was a subsidiary under Landcare Research. It is one of the companies that would have benefited from this development. We have others in New Zealand who will benefit from the development of this legislation, but it raises for me and for Labour members of this House very important concern about the fact that even though CRI should be able to divest themselves of subsidiaries, as they're no longer able or interested or see it as a priority, to carry that subsidiary through to the next stage of the research that it's undertaking. The fact that in Surtrac, New Zealand has lost all that taxpayers put into it to develop it as a subsidiary of Landcare Research, and that information and potential economic benefit has now gone to Canada, is something that we shouldn't say, well, that's the way it is because the legislation allows it. I agree with the point that CRI should be able to move on from whatever subsidiary they may have developed, but there has to be a better way than what happened with Surtrac when it was a subsidiary of Landcare Research, which was that it is now totally owned by a Canadian company. We have lost the benefit, even though it was our money, New Zealanders' money, that went into developing that expertise in the first place. So it is really an opportunity for Parliament as a whole to debate how better we might progress the role of subsidiaries of Crown Research Institutes. Mr. Chairman, the final point that I would like to make is in relation to the opposition from Federated Farmers. I was very interested in the points that David Carter made. He said really that when Don Nicholson was running the show that it was an act empire. He did so very delicately. He didn't mention his name. I can't be bothered with that sort of game. We all know who he was talking about. When Don Nicholson was running the show in Federated Farmers, it was an act little empire, and their opposition to this legislation came primarily because it was introduced in discussion by a Labour-led government, and then of course because it had some compulsion attached to it. I'm pleased that Don has moved on in his life, but I do think that it causes another area of consideration and concern, and that is that an organisation that has been very well regarded as being a genuine and independent voice for the farming community, a critical part of our economy, was for a short period of time taken over by one political party and no longer represented the best interests of the farming community or of the New Zealand economy as a whole. I think that is of concern, and that sort of outing, for want of a better term, may well have been better raised at the time of Federated Farmers' opposition to this legislation rather than later. This is a good bill. I want to acknowledge the Labour ministers who introduced this debate in the first place and support the fact that the national government has carried it on. The work that the Select Committee has done has been extraordinarily robust, very detailed. They not only had submissions from the general public, obviously people who were interested, I think 15 or 16 organisations actually made submission according to their report back, but they also sought independent and expert advice. That's a very good process. It should be commended to other select committees as a way of ensuring that when we get legislation back to the House like this, that we can have some confidence that the best eyes and ears in the country have had their say, had their input, and we're looking at robust legislation. It will give us more international credibility. That's the primary point of it. But it does offer us an opportunity to say what are consumers of our products in the future looking for, and then, most importantly, not only how do we track the animal back to the herd and the condition and the environment, but how do we as a nation make sure that what they learn when they track that product back to the source is good news. We don't want them hearing that the animal that they are proposing to eat has come from a herd which destroys our environment. That's the next big challenge for this government.
Dr. Camcorder.
Mr. Chair, it's a pleasure to rise.